Hello, and welcome everybody to the Zixi webinar today. We are just kicking off now. We're going to be discussing complex live streaming over IP and any IP network. We're going to give a minute or so to let people join in. We've got a great panel ahead of us with our good friends from Blizzard, NetInsight, AWS, and Comcast Technology Solutions. We're going to be discussing a range of topics from remote and live production, all the way through virtualization, the cloud, consumer trends, and into artificial intelligence. So we're looking forward to discussing these interesting topics as we get there. Probably going to give another minute or so because there are a number of folks that are coming in. We'll get through this and we will get to our panelists very shortly. Thank you for your patience for a moment. And with that, while people are joining, I think we'll take the time as we get on to 11:01. Zixi has a number of webinars that are coming up. Want to make sure you folks can please find some times in your very busy schedules now that everyone is at home. Coming up this Thursday, we're going to have a ZenMaster Master Control in the cloud, where we're able to show how Zixi can virtualize and bring remote operations into the cloud and be able to do everything from monitor, orchestrate, and run broadcast operations. Next week, we'll be showing you how protected multicast with Zixi has numerous advantages, both technical, economic, and how you can run on your fiber networks, not just over the internet. After that, we'll be doing on Wednesday our live video cloud editing with our very good partners, Blackbird. And finally, on Thursday, we'll be touching on live video content protection with our good partners, Ardetto, and our good folks from Zixi. So with no further ado, I am Eric Bolton, and I am the VP of Business Development, and I get the pleasure of trying to moderate this panel. With me is Blomdell, who's the head of products at NetInsight, Joe Mancini, our Senior Director of Product Management at Comcast Technology Solutions, Corey Smith, Find End User with Director in Live Operations Global Broadcast, and David Griggs, our Senior Product Manager coming out of AWS. And so with that, I will stop sharing and let you get to see our fine panelists. Gentlemen, welcome. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out here. This is quite an international group. We've going to say good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all the variety of folks. We've got people in Portland, California, Stockholm, Denver, and I am broadcasting to you live from Patagonia. So obviously, gentlemen, with everything that's been going on and coronavirus, pandemics, people having to work from home, there's been a huge, large-scale shift in the television industry, and people are working remotely. You've got to maintain required workflows, broadcast and on live linear news and event-based programming. What is your view to the impact that this is happening on cloud-based workflows, remote broadcast, and how you maintain the continuity that we all know? So given that, I think, Corey, if you as our resident expert on live broadcast could weigh in, I'd love to hear what you think.
Sure. So, like a lot of television operators, we all kind of work in the confines of a studio, a physical location, a venue, whether it's live sports or whether it's news programming, entertainment, any kind of, things that involve being in the outside world, right? So about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, whatever it is now, 6 maybe, we saw the entire live sports world just basically, shut down, and all new content was basically, vaporized from orbit. So what do you do when you can't have a collection of people at a venue? What do you do when you can't have your sports team show up? What do you do when, the gathering of folks is no longer an option, whether it's at a studio location or whether it's at a production control room somewhere, even if you're taking in feeds from other places, just generating content it became a daunting task. So a lot of the stuff that we had to face was, getting out of the physical venue realm and kind of moving to the cloud very rapidly. And so we spent, several weeks trying to figure out how we were going to actually pull off bringing esports back, because every time we turned around, there was a new restriction. There was a new restriction here. Every week there was something that was changing, and it was affecting the way we were essentially trying to build our production methodology in the new world and adapting to the ever-changing kind of landscape of quarantine. So, 5 or 6 weeks ago, we basically embarked on the fact that we needed to find a true cloud kind of production model, because everybody was going to be working out of their homes. Both contributors from a gameplay perspective, analysts, everybody was going to be remote and distributed. So, it was quite the challenge to pull off. But we finally went back on the air the weekend of April 4th with Overwatch League. It wasn't an easy thing for us to pull off, but we managed to do it. And it wasn't exactly the cleanest show that we wanted to have, but we've gotten better week over week over week. And so I really think that through all this, it's really taken our IP digital first kind of mentality that we have in the cloud already. Most of our transmission system and distribution packaging infrastructure is all in cloud today. The only thing we really need to figure out is how to get contribution up to the cloud that was normally happening in the venue in a traditional truck model. Just figure out how to get that to cloud and how to switch that infrastructure. Like going from 0 to 100 in REMI, without having really been able to do it before is quite an engineering task for anybody, not just us, but a lot of our, partners in the gaming space, EA, Riot, they've all had to try to do it, EA. So you kind of really see a large shift to the cloud.
No question. That was excellent and helpful. Mr. Griggs, what are your ideas on this subject matter?
Yeah, I think it's just listening to Corey speak about it. It's amazing, really. Like, I think it speaks to two things. I think one, obviously, it speaks to the agility of Terrestrial and IP to be able to pull something like that off. It also speaks, I think, to the ingenuity of human beings in the face of a crisis. It feels like we've made years of progress in 4 weeks due to this terrible catalyst that's been sort of thrown on us. But I think that it's great to see IP being able to, essentially terrestrial IP cloud infrastructure to be able to respond well and to be able to provide enough support so that we can get some semblance of normality at a time like this. So, yeah, it was really kind of inspiring to hear Corey talk about that, the way that they handled that, and Blizzard bounced back really quickly from essentially a very difficult situation. They have no audience, and not the correct infrastructure in place at the time to do a full remote production. So yeah, it's very inspiring to hear that.
Yeah, no, it was definitely quite a black swan event around, and we think forced a radical move that we'd all been waiting on and sort of long range planning. Tor, from your side, speaking of infrastructure, what's the sort of net insight as we're all trying to assemble these tools?
No, but I think, as Corey said, it's been quite a dramatic change on the whole industry. It feels like we've reached this peak reliability view. Like, the whole industry has been really focused on reliability and security and delivery. And I think now we've all come to the point where we need to deliver in new ways with agility, addressability, and a totally different way of working. And I think that's started to see on our customers as well. We've seen a tremendous shift over the last couple of years to IP. But I will say now, with the pandemic going on, we see even stronger push towards the cloud, and even more models where you want to remotely reach the infrastructure and deploy in a way where you don't have to send in people. And that's just been a tremendous change over the last couple of weeks. And I will say the industry's readiness and willingness to test things that they haven't tried before. So that's, even though the situation is horrible going on, we must say that as an industry, I think we're evolving very quickly right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good jumping point. So, we've all been working in virtualization, and I'll run back to our good friends at Blizzard because they have to deal with this live as we try to support them in the vendor side. Live production is a whole different ecosystem. It revolves in different technologies. You're trying to use different folks who've been typically on premise. Now that has, as Tor points out, and David says, we've really accelerated into this. How do you see these new world orders coming in, the tool sets as they mature? What does this mean for live production? What is this going to mean in programming? And will this impact delivery models?
Yeah. So I think that the emphasis on moving to cloud and trying to, I don't think that there's a world we really go back to the same world we came from. I think that there's now this idea of a massively hybrid approach to how you build infrastructure. And I don't know that, because of events like this, and this could happen in the future. But it could be a natural disaster, earthquake, fire, volcano, who knows, right? But the ability to basically make this massive shift to do kind of this virtual broadcasting from anywhere in the world gives the broadcaster flexibility that they, a lot of people don't currently have today because they're bound to physical hardware plants. In our particular case, we haven't been bound to those hardware constraints because we always kind of envision a world where we're using somebody else's server in the cloud. So from our standpoint, everything that we wanted to go after from a philosophy has been a set of basic microservices that we tie together to make a cohesive workflow work end to end, and that's what the cloud gives us. It allows us to scale kind of more or less in an infinite kind of way. But kind of going back to the transition to cloud and remote operations is that the venue infrastructure anymore is kind of dissolving. You don't, unless you're actually playing a physical sport, and a lot of our stuff is very, very much video game play. So we do have analysts and casters that kind of contribute to some of that broadcast, but for the most part, it's you're following a virtual camera in a video game. And so our maps could run from anywhere. They don't need to be at a physical venue unless we want a live audience. So our ability to switch and be agile in that way has obviously advantages in this particular type of world, but I think from a traditional broadcast standpoint, there's going to be more emphasis moving forward with creating this virtualized infrastructure, so you can actually cut away from a venue. You actually can remove yourself from kind of the traditional constraints in broadcasting, and on top of that, I think that it gives the producers more of a surface to paint a new picture. The canvas is now much bigger than what it was, and I always think that moving forward, it's always going to be kind of this new hybrid approach.
Yep, no, absolutely, and we'll kind of go. We've got a couple of people who know a little bit about cloud and hybrid approaches. Tor, I just saw you come in and wanted you to pick up from there, given hybrid.
No, I just wanted to build on that. I think I think the world as we see with the hybrid scale and the hyperscale that we see with cloud, with on-prem and in cloud, and utilizing the scale and the elasticity of the cloud, I think that's going to be even stronger. And I think the ones who succeed are the ones who can protect the balance sheets and investments they have on the on-prem equipment and connecting that to the cloud and making that in an efficient way. Because in the end, no one can really afford to rebuild their entire pipelines and their hardware infrastructure without doing that in a gradual way. And I think that's crucial. And I think, Corey, you've been in a good position to build it from scratch. But I think for a lot of people in the industry, now that's a really big challenge to work with what they have today and then easily getting in and out of the cloud in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive investment, massive
investment. No question. So speaking of those investments, Mr. Griggs, Amazon plays fairly large in this part and tends to make certain investments in this space. What are your thoughts?
I think it's, well, firstly, it's a subject that's really dear to my heart because I spent a lot of time working in the vendor space, but on the production side of the business. And I think there's a real opportunity here is what I think. I think we're starting to see technologies now that are available in public cloud infrastructure that really facilitate this natural evolution of REMI to a more cloud-centric based production. So, that means bringing the production switch and moving large parts of the PCR. I totally take Tor's point. I think there has to be a hybrid approach. You're not going to talk, NEP into trashing all of their capital infrastructure and move everything to the public cloud. That's just not a realistic business proposition. It doesn't work on many levels. So I think there has to be a gradual approach, and part of a role like a company like AWS is our role in this journey is to help with that, is to provide that hybrid approach to facilitate workflows that make sense for customers and not necessarily try and force a particular model on anyone. But if I was thinking about this unencumbered, I would definitely think there's an opportunity to rethink how we think about live production. Do we need to continue to think about ME-based workflows? Do we need to continue to carry forward a lot of the baggage that we have had for many years, largely because of technical constraints, not creative ones? And I think I think there's a lot of precedent here. Like we can learn a lot from our friends at Avid, right? Who totally revolutionized post-production pretty much overnight from being this labor-intensive manual process that involved multiple pieces of equipment to suddenly needing a mouse and keyboard. And I think that is a huge transition. It took a very technical, very operationally intensive role and made it a creative one. You know, the operator of a modern nonlinear editor has no idea how that all gets composited behind the scenes. It's not part of their part of the knowledge they're required to operate. It's a very creative space. Live production is a very creative and editorial focused role. Today, though, it's very much encumbered, I believe, by technology. And as technologists, our role is to try and solve that and make solutions gradually, of course, that transition away from technical roles into more creative ones. And I think that's a real opportunity here with cloud production and the sort of natural migration away towards and around REMI.
No, that's very insightful, and I think we'd all agree that this has been a huge acceleration. Many people had long-range planning in place, and this was in case of emergency break glass, and the glass has been broken. Given that we haven't, and people, I think one of the reasons that they were able to move so quickly into this virtual space and into this cloud-based workflow is this just general push to IP terrestrial. Everybody's been planning for the lack of C-band. They're trying to make sure that they can handle as they move for traditional cable delivery and the OTT spaces and new streaming services. Mr. Joe Mancini over at Comcast, how do you see this entire virtualization, as we've now talked about live production, and we're just talking more in general about the embrace and adoption and evolution of IP terrestrial?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. You know, this is a really great forum, and I feel like I'm going to reiterate a lot of the points that I just heard from Tor and David. But you know, at Comcast and at CTS, we deal with every type of video acquisition. And it's across IP, it's across satellite. So we see everything that we've built out from the traditional MVPD sense and now adapting these IP-based technologies. So not just looking at the C-band and the changes in the restrictions in the C-band, but the overall changing landscape of OTT operators and MVPDs. So we see the cost and infrastructure to acquire content over satellite. It just doesn't fit the new model. If you're looking to build out infrastructure and that's going to cost on OpEx, you have to have into the knowledge base, like David was just talking about, to be able to run a lot of these systems. It doesn't make sense to put the investment in and have that infrastructure. So with the cost of the bandwidth that we see that is just continuing to come down, thanks to AWS and others with cloud-based solutions, this makes the ability to have reliable video transport at a low cost using solutions like Zixi and other reliable UDP technologies to transport video over IP, do it securely, reliably, and actually be able to deliver, you know, some of the highest bitrate content that we've been able to deliver ever, right? So we're seeing new thresholds that are reached on quality, new thresholds that are reached on bit rates. And so kind of following that, you know, we combine you know, cloud-based processing stacks, CDN, OTT delivery. An operator can just avoid having that on-prem investment now. So it really kind of rounds out the model, and we're seeing that trend not only with the newer OTT operators and delivery mechanisms, but also kind of reaching back and now seeing some new build out from traditional MVPDs as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I guess, David, you've got to be seeing that as you guys fill. Media Connect continues to roll out there and fill a lot of those gaps of work in concert. And I'm going to get to Tor, and I know that infrastructure, and then of course the gentleman that gets the content himself. Yeah. But what are your thoughts?
Firstly, I totally agree with Joe. I think we're absolutely in a lot of alignment there. There's a lot of I think it's really easy to focus on C-band reallocation as a large driver for sort of customers moving away from investing or continuing to invest in satellite technology. I think that's an easy target. I think we all agreed that actually previously, that, you know, I think that whilst that's clearly a motivator, I think there are much more significant motivations out there for customers who are looking at their primary distribution put secondary distribution to one side. I think satellite's, a great technology for that and will be for some time. But for primary distribution, there are a lot of motivators outside just the C-band eradication. So one of them clearly is agility. One of the things that satellite, and to some extent, managed fixed infrastructure like fiber as well, but to a lesser extent. But one of the big problems with satellite is just a simple lack in agility. You cannot, at a reasonable cost at least, turn around satellite connectivity in a few hours. And IP and terrestrial does give you that capability. It gives you that ability to respond to a changing environment. So that's one, definitely the agility. Cost, I think, is also a really interesting one. As you can imagine, someone who runs a terrestrial TS over IP service for AWS, I spend a lot of time analyzing, the relative costs and total cost of ownership for traditional infrastructure versus IP. And it's a really complex field. It's nowhere near as simple as you might think. Clearly satellite is very CapEx heavy. But once it's running, typically, you don't, certainly from a broadcast perspective, you're not paying to add an additional downlink. That's mostly, the investment there's mostly in the downlink infrastructure. So it's more of a broadcast technology, whereas IP is typically point to point. So there is a kind of incremental cost. So there's this very complex trade-off between the cost of capital infrastructure or traditional infrastructure like satellite versus newer technologies like IP. But in just about all cases that I can think of, IP wins on the commercial incentive side of things as well. So I think those are two motivators that we see are really helping drive this transition from satellite to IP technology.
No, I agreed with that. And certainly Tor Net Insight knows a little bit about this fiber and move to IP and terrestrial and the parts and the long-standing balance between fixed infrastructures and satellite. What are your thoughts?
No, but I think a lot of good things have been covered when it comes to cost. And I think that's getting solved over time with we see cost going down and egress cost in general. That's really been killing a lot of cases moving into cloud and cloud infrastructure compared to traditional delivery models. But we see that really coming down along with quality and latency being really improved. So nowadays, I would say you run really good workflows across cloud and hybrid infrastructure. The main challenge we've started to see is around interoperability, because we see a lot of different, customers and vendors building their own kind of solutions. And I think when constructing the workflows and making that in a hybrid scale approach, we as an industry need to come together on an interoperability mechanism that makes it easy. Because the point with SDI was really easy when it's a cable and everyone knew what was happening on each side of the cable. But now as we move into a fully IP-based world in the cloud as well, we need to decide on how we do interoperability in a nice way as well. Because right now that's driving a lot of inefficiencies in the integrations and in the workflows. This makes it really hard to execute and move in the agile way that we all want to do.
That's important. And I think we're all watching that. So speaking of having now this tools and infrastructure at our disposal, we're witnessing numbers of streaming services coming to market, very competitive marketplace, trying to chase a migrating and moving consumer. I mean, Corey, you're at the vanguard of actually showing what younger audiences want to see, where they're going to go, where advertisers are going to want to place their dollars. What are your thoughts as we move from a sort of VOD, Netflix, Hulu-based pick title world to the live action that's going to hold people's attention? How do you see that playing out?
Well, a lot of the services you see today aren't really focusing on a lot of live type event broadcasting. It's always, live to VOD or something that was been post-produced from a live event at some point in time. So I think that, people like Hulu that have both the traditional kind of television service and VOD service kind of combo are really kind of like pushing kind of the edge of that, kind of television, adoption for people that want to cut cord from a traditional sense. In our particular world, we focus on live first. So if we can nail live really well, VOD is in the bag. It comes as a default to all of the work and investment we've made into the live broadcast, because a lot of our stuff just immediately gets turned around to VOD. So we don't really have to worry about the VOD aspect of it if we really nail our live production piece. And so we spend a lot of time and emphasis on making sure we have compelling content, making sure that the show is actually cut to a high quality level, that we have the compelling narratives that we build into our shows that makes it easy to watch, easy to follow the kind of the action. But I want to kind of go back to a little bit about both the REMI piece, the conversion to IP, and kind of some of the things that both Joe, David, and Tor talked about, is not only that the kind of like the satellite infrastructure is kind of like aging out, and you've got things like Starlink and stuff like that are happening now, but a lot of the traditional like C-band stuff, like how long are we going to keep those birds in orbit? And a lot of those things are kind of aging out, and decaying orbits are starting to become a thing with some of these satellites. And then on top of that, like you have a resource pool of engineers across the world that aren't exactly getting any younger. And so as folks are retiring out of the business, you're losing a lot of that intellectual property that, that really knew the ins and outs of a lot of the old school broadcast engineering methodologies around satellite, around fiber, around baseband, building hubs. And, as we can kind of convert to this IP world, there's a rapid change in the type of talent we have to go out and try to hire for as well. So the longer you kind of stay in this, traditional kind of, model of satellite and fiber and all this rest of this other, CapEx infrastructure, the more you're going to have a hard time finding, engineering resources to kind of continue to be educated, because the broadcast schools aren't pumping these guys out. And so that's one of the things that we have to take into account as new age broadcasters, if you will. The idea of, we want to focus on new technologies and not typically focus on some of the old, because of the fact that our engineering groups and our departments 10, 15 years from now aren't going to know what satellite is. They're not going to understand what baseband was back in the day. They're going to hear about it on Wikipedia or their father talking about it. Like over the weekend, I was cleaning out my garage, and I found some old 3/4 pneumatic tape, and I posted it up to my team internally on Slack and said, "Hey, brand new, never used, make offer." And one of my guys came back and said, "Hey, let me ping my dad, see if he wants it." And it was kind of one of those like funny moments. It was meant to be funny, but again, the shift to IP and the shift to digital, from a TV perspective, the revolution's already on. And it's just going to continue to grow.
Yep. No, that's so true. And so speaking of that move, as we go from live to VOD and traditional television, Joe, you are both in the technology solution business and the owner of a network and launching new streaming services. How does Comcast look at these things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, Corey, you mentioned a couple of things there that, some terms that I actually haven't heard in a little while, one of them being cord cutting, right? I think that cord cutting was a buzzword that we heard a few years ago that was repeated as new services. And actually, when you think of a virtual MVPD, providing a similar service to a set-top box operation, a lot of the trends now are more focused on the content that's owned by the provider and making sure that that's viewed by their audience, not necessarily allowing for other networks to join in that solution. So, I think that a lot of this is generational, and that you're going to see a shift. And although the revolution is certainly on, this shift is going to last quite some time, right? So there's going to be a need in this in media and in video delivery to continue to deliver to both an IP-based solution and grow that, but also make sure that that traditional sense of delivery is still viable. It's still an option for those who use it. Going into the VOD and live services blending together, absolutely, we're seeing this across not only Comcast services, but also the services that we help to enable within CTS. And sports, esports, news, these are live events that are going to continue to drive viewership. And actually, I think, kind of going back, Corey, to your points here, if you solve for live, you will solve for VOD, because you bring together this business that attraction of live is not going to go away. People are always going to have that need to have immediate interaction with what they're watching, and then coupling that with a seamless experience with VOD content. I think that's where the holy grail is for us to be heading towards.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at a lot of the like VOD services that are out there, and only like 5 to 10% of the catalog is ever really warm from a caching standpoint, because that's all that people are watching is the new stuff. Certainly if you have a deep catalog in your service, so, some of that stuff may get watched occasionally if somebody wants to go back and really watch Spaceballs as an example. But like you go back to, kind of what Peacock is doing and what CBS has done, and things that Disney has done, is everybody's taking and trying to retain their IP back again for themselves and building their own traditional, now digital first platforms. And so I think we're going to also see a lot of shift in the market where people are kind of pulling some of their content back. It's why me as a content creator, why am I, giving all my eyeballs away to some other platform? Why not build my own first party service where I can service my customers the best, because I know who they are, they're interested in my content. We do a lot of studies around our particular folks, and so tailoring those experiences, I think, is going to be part of this kind of evolution of things.
Yeah,
that's interesting, because you say tailoring and taking that part of knowing your customer and delivering. Amazon sells a few things and has both the benefit of the network and a small thing called Amazon Prime. And I was quite impressed with their array of both Oscars and Emmys when we took a little visit down there in LA. What are your thoughts?
I wasn't invited.
No, next time we'll drag you down from Portland, we promise.
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts. I mean, I think it's super interesting, this shift we're seeing. Firstly, I want to say, as a consumer of television, I don't think linear is dead, right? I think we probably 5 years ago all rushed to that opinion that somehow this notion that SVOD and TVOD were going to completely take over the consumption of television. And of course, for a while it looked that way. But I think there's a real concern here, certainly in my household. We probably spend more time sitting in front of our favorite SVOD or TVOD direct-to-consumer app running on my smart TV, clicking through tiles endlessly, trying to find something that we both agree we would like to watch. And that is a very odd experience when you look at it kind of out of context, right? And so I think aggregation is key here. As we start to see this explosion of direct-to-consumer apps, and Corey's absolutely right? You're curating an experience that's finely tuned for your audience, and that's exactly what we want to do when we create these types of services. But I think what we need is to start to look at how we aggregate all of the multitude of direct-to-consumer apps we have now, because essentially we're kind of reinventing the television channel, right? In a sense, we're creating a themed experience that tailors to a specific audience. But I think one of the problems, if we don't have aggregation, if we don't have the ability for it to browse and discover new content, we're going to end up in this TVOD echo chamber where all we end up doing is watching reruns of our favorite shows. We don't find new stuff. I think recommendation engines go so far. They certainly allow you to sort of see a tile of something that you may not have seen before. But there's this notion, I think, of being able to be shown content, to be able to choose between essentially what I would call linear feeds, or they're probably not, and to discover content in a more natural, holistic way than we do just looking at recommendation tiles. And I think that is a super interesting way to think about the evolution of direct-to-consumer and how we can try to provide a more cohesive, entertaining experience for customers at home. It's I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone does, but I think there's a really interesting future there as long as we can solve this problem around aggregation.
No, that's a good point, and you do definitely in the plumbing. And I think you mentioned the other day we were talking about decision fatigue and staring. So I think that everyone likes to come in and plunk on a nice set of linear programming. We of course want to keep that tradition alive. It does require a significant amount of infrastructure. And if we're going to move towards the spatification and hypothetical, and I'm interested in what the group thinks, but knowing that you need to have that infrastructure and that you're going to say, okay, how am I going to deliver and aggregate this myriad of programming channels to create a hypothetical bespoke scenario? What does that mean? Like Tor, I think you would like to weigh in on this. What's the thought from a net inside point on how are you going to, how does that infrastructure, what does that need to be? How do you trunk line across the globe? And, you know, while Netflix has proven you can bring content from all over the world to other places of the world, I think Live has a similar opportunity.
Yeah, no, but I would like to build on what David said, like on the whole idea of search and discovery. I think right now you're kind of dragged into those different stovepipes and you don't really find that common aggregation. I think it's very similar to where Spotify and others were in the problem they were solving. And if you go back to what they did, they really started to look at the metadata. And the metadata today in most of the services is kind of shallow. So I think to solve the problem, a big part of the solution is to find different ways of fingerprinting and looking at the content and getting a deeper understanding of what's in there. It's not only the way that we've editorialized and built the metadata around the videos, but we also need to work with the more depth and like the fingerprints of the actual videos and do recommendations on that. And then I think on the other side, you also need to think about editorial. I think sometimes we trust the computer too much when it comes to recommendations, like more like this than you might like. I think one big part of television, what makes live linear so interesting is the surprise moment of editorial. And I think we as an industry need to figure out how we get that surprise moment and the editorial side into the online experience as well, even though you're jumping across different D2C experiences and apps as well. I think if we solve that, that will really cater for a really good TV experience going forward as well.
Yeah, that's a very important, and it kind of gives us a nice jumping point as we're talking about it. When you have metadata and you have things that are going to be driven, clearly at a spatification, clearly at a curation of the edge, and even now as we're moving to smart TVs and direct delivery into devices like Fire Stick and Roku, et cetera, how does this group see a curated artificial intelligence edge, and how do we, the industry, providing that infrastructure, you know, leverage machine learning, learn how to actually tee up? If you're going to have this wonderful world and know that I should be watching my Blizzard esports right now, I need to have a lot of things available to that. I need to have work in conjunction on all of the group here represented. So with that, I'm going to kind of kick it down to David and then work my way around the screen. David, you're on mute.
I think I'm, thank you. I think I'm legally obliged to mention machine learning on any public appearance I make. So this is great that you brought that up. No, I think, I think Tor's point is a really good one, right? I think that machine learning is just a tool, right? It's a very effective tool at providing analysis and recommendations based on a huge amount of data that, that as human beings, we can't necessarily contemplate or consider. But it isn't necessarily editorial, right? I do think there's room here for human beings to make decisions about what goes into let's say the programming of the future, because ultimately the models that we have, as good as they are no replacement for that. And so whilst I think that machine learning has a huge amount to play in its ability to be a data point in a decision around programming, it doesn't necessarily have to take the helm. Of course, there are models where that does work, perhaps in pop-up environments where perhaps it's more of a scope issue. You don't have enough people physically to be able to do the kind of editorial you need across thousands of channels. Then yeah, sure, I think there's a role for it. But I don't think we should rush to the conclusion that somehow artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to start to become entirely and 100% in charge of programming. That said, I think the Spotify model is a really interesting one. And it's certainly a service that I use, again, more in this capacity of putting on something in the background, like while I'm making dinner. I don't sit down and turn on Spotify and then concentrate on the content, right? It becomes more of a background, something to have on while I'm doing something else. But often I'll be surprised by a piece of content that turns up. and I'll be like, oh, that's really, I really like that. That's really resonates with me, and I'll go find out what that is. I think that's super interesting because that's a kind of discovery that you don't get from VOD, right? You don't get that from a tile on a screen, but what you do get from having a curated experience, whether it's machine learning based or human curated, is this element of surprise and discovery that I think is really important, and I think will remain important for the foreseeable future.
Well, that's impressive. And taking that, and I think there's a lot of ground to cover here. We've got quality of experience that's measured in the programming that came to you, the way that it's actually going to be Spotified and curated, and that we want to set it live and not have to actually pick out every title that we wish to watch in our playlists. But does things like 4K, does higher picture quality start to matter, and how does that all play into the programming pieces of this? Because the pipes need to be there, the content needs to be ever more compelling. Someday we will see 8K. I mean, the amount of actual high fidelity 4K programming is in reality quite limited. I'm going to jump over to Joe for a second. Joe, what is Comcast starting to see this push that way as you guys push up the boundaries? And we knew we were having an Olympics coming. We'll put that on pause, but a lot of things kind of in that kind of vein of thinking.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I think that we're seeing is data sharing becoming more relevant, and the agreements that are happening between the content owners and the operators or the distributors of that content are allowing for more data to be shared than maybe we saw in the past with traditional video delivery. So using this data to understand viewing patterns is going to help services like the CTS services to deliver reliable, high quality channels even more efficient. And linear is a 24/7, always on, always being delivered. And so if you can understand how those linear channels are being viewed and the patterns behind them, where it's popular, what times, in what regions, it's only going to help us to be able to more accurately deliver things like the 4K content to the areas that it's needed. You're not going to be watching 4K necessarily on your mobile device, and maybe that top profile isn't required to be delivered everywhere all the time. And if we can better understand that, it's going to continue to drive down the cost of how we deliver the content to the consumer.
No question. And taking that drive and the part, and I know that we have certain questions around things like ATS 3.0. What does this mean in the context of an industry? What we're seeing here is we have more metadata and more machine learned and ultimately artificial intelligence that has ad and revenue implications as we try to manage our $250 billion of global broadcast. What are the thoughts around this? Begs the questions of ad supported, subscription based. And I'll roll it over to Corey just to say, from the Blizzard creating this is a starting point, and then I'll kind of roll around the panel because we're going to start running out of time, and hopefully all of our viewers are finishing out their poll questions, which we will be posting at the end of all this when I say goodbye. But I want to make sure everyone's pressing buttons. But Corey, what do you think about that as we push these things through in those models?
Well, a lot of our live shows are, we do have ad inventory that we insert into our programming. We do have sponsorship deals that we've made through our partners that are involved with gaming. And so we're going to continue to kind of drive some of that, monetization, because we want to, we want to be able to sponsor some of our content, whether it's an analyst discussion about like what happened at halftime during a particular match, or we want to run billboards in our broadcast. It's part of the live show itself. But the way we do it is that the inventory could be, removed and put back in for if we were going to, convert it to a TVOD level service. I mean, we do a lot of like SSAI type of, ad insertion. So we do things behind the scenes. So, we avoid the impression nightmare of pop-up blockers and all the rest of the other stuff. But, that aside, is we do have a very strong ecosystem of sponsorship opportunity that we build into our broadcasts.
Fantastic. And keeping in mind at the time. So Tor, what, as you guys sit to try to support this, and as we're rounding this out, looking at managed and unmanaged IP, any final thoughts as Net Insights kind of pushed out things like Nimbra Edge and things that you've done to help extend that? I mean, obviously you guys are playing on everyone's backbone and on a global basis.
Yeah, we're doing our best. Yeah, no, but I think our big push now is really to enable our customers and partners to keep the existing infrastructure they're having and evolve with the whole IPifications on the camera side and on the equipment side coming in, and then how we connect it to edge compute and central cloud computing as well, and then how we enable a really easy way to take the content that going into OVPs or MVPDs, or how we work with editorial boundaries as well. So a large part of the work that we're doing right now, and we're rethink the biggest challenges are, is how we gradually evolve that hybrid infrastructure in an easy way. And then, as Corey mentioned before, on the talent side, how we keep and help the talents now working at our customers, how we get them into the new space as well. And that's one of the big challenges that we're working with right now.
It's fantastic. And taking that talent and taking ads, nods, Peacock, waiting for the Olympics. Joe, what do you got here before we pick off?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So, I think that we're going to see, smart data, data that has actionable results, being able to drive ad decisions and maybe new ways of forming, advertising within the video as we know it. Short form ads are definitely becoming, sort of the norm on some of these new services, but we'll also start to see things like product placement that are driven by the metadata and the tags within that information, ads that are more personalized and tailored towards not only the demographic of who's watching it, but actually the person watching it themselves. So all these changes within advertising that we'll see driven by data are going to help the ad experience, and that will help the tolerance to have an ad supported linear model. And so I think that we'll see that uptick.
Excellent, excellent. And last and certainly not least, Mr. Griggs, we've covered a lot of subjects here. Any parting shots as we're trying to address, and knowing that you were looking at everything from the virtualization, 4K quality of experience, and I'm sure no stranger to ML, machine learning, and the metadata required.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I said this before, but AWS sees our role in this as we're really here to help, right? We're technologists, we provide platforms, we provide microservices that we think are useful to our customers. I think, machine learning, when we talk about specifically about advertisements in television, I think the closer to the edge we get that, the more relevant they become to the consumer. And I think that's a good thing. It's a very polarizing subject because it involves the sharing of information, and people are rightly sensitive about that. But if you look at the end result, and this is just my opinion, I think I would much rather see an advertisement for something that was remotely interesting to me than something that wasn't. And I think that ultimately improves the quality of experience that a consumer has of your content. I think it keeps them watching when sort of a spray and pray type approach to advertisements does not. People tend to start channel surfing when they see a commercial with something they've seen a million times before and not interested in. So I think that's where an area where machine learning particularly can help, because it can process this huge smorgasbord of data to provide very finely pointed and focused commercial opportunities. And that's good not only for consumers, but it's good for broadcasters, because I think it gives them a way to demonstrate a lot more value in the spots they're making available, because they can demonstrate that they're going to a demographic that is essentially receptive to the concepts that are being promoted. So that's a really interesting area that I think technology can play a huge role in. It's not really editorial so much as it is just focused relevance for commercial content. And I think that's great. I think that will continue to support linear services for the foreseeable future. I think, lastly, I think, as I said, AWS, we're very excited to be part of the M&E space. We've hired a lot of people, I think that I know that have a lot of experience in that space. And I think we're really excited to kind of work. If you looked, I was looking at the people here, at least on my view, and you kind of see a very kind of a chain of custody here of content, a supply chain. If you like, you have Corey at the kind of cold face making content, you have Tor at the edge, you have AWS kind of providing a technology platform, and then you have, of course, Comcast, who are a fantastic MPVD. So you have that whole chain there, and I think what's great is that you can get 4 people like this, and we have a healthy discussion about the future of television, and to see some alignment like across this spectrum of individuals, I think it's really cool. So that would be my parting comment, Eric.
Perfect and kindly put. We greatly appreciate it. So, gentlemen, we went slightly beyond, but we've managed to hold pretty high participant numbers all the way through the edge, and I would say that's entirely due to your participation. So we want to thank you for being great partners and clients. Corey Smith from Blizzard, Joe Mancini from Comcast, Tor Blomdell from our good friends at Net Insight, and David Griggs, thank you for that final key end in the things. For everyone who's still listening on the part, this will all be recorded. We took a series of polls, so we're very happy that you guys participated. We will post those results, and we really look forward to. So we thank you all for coming, and we look forward to the next chat. And please, everyone, stay safe until the next time we get a chance to meet.